It's August 21st, 2020. I'm NBC 15 Chief Meteorologist Alan Sealls. Another name on the list as of earlier today, Laura, Tropical Storm Laura. As we go into the weekend, the next name on the list is going to be Marco. It has been an active hurricane season, and we continue to watch a tropical depression in the far western Caribbean and, of course, Tropical Storm Laura pretty close to the northeastern portion of the Caribbean. As of late afternoon, Laura has winds of 45 miles an hour. Tropical depression number 14, winds of just 35 miles an hour. The two of them are generally moving westward, although the depression is moving a little more to the northwest. Here's a forecast, multiple models for Tropical Storm Laura. You may notice the trend. In the last several days, models have shifted toward the west, which is what they do. Twice a day, we get a whole new set of data. The computer models reassess what's happening and reproject where something is moving, the center of low pressure, in this case, not the strength. A slight difference, the forecast track potentially is going to interact with a lot of land, and that's something that typically will weaken a tropical system. So for those of us in the Gulf of Mexico, that's what we hope for. But for folks in the Caribbean, on the northern edge of the Caribbean, they don't hope for that. Don't forget the other system, which will become Marco, impacting the Yucatan Peninsula and then making a path toward the upper Texas coast or the Louisiana coast. Here's one thing that may confuse people if you've seen this online. Two models plotted on the same map where you see them crossing over. They are not going to merge or collide. Those are two different times. In fact, you'll see why on the forecast cone, which gives you the timing and the wind speed projections. First of all, for what will become Marco, likely getting into the Gulf Sunday afternoon, strengthening to maybe hurricane force. This is going through Sunday afternoon into Monday morning, and then moving through the Dominican Republic, Haiti, maybe the Turks and Caicos and Cuba. That will be Laura. Winds projected Sunday night into Monday morning, about 65 miles an hour. Move forward in time to 1 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. And here is again something that probably has confused people online. You see these two forecast cones touching. That does not mean they're going to merge, simply because at 1 o'clock Tuesday, this is the position forecast for Laura. At 1 o'clock Tuesday, this is the position forecast for Marco. They are going to stay separate. Unlikely they'll have any substantial interaction. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But the main thing that you really need to focus on is not whether they'll join together or whether this has happened before. You need to focus on whether you are in either of those forecast cones going into early next week. Still, there is a lot of uncertainty with these storms. Even though we've been talking about disturbances for over a week and then tropical systems recently, it doesn't mean we have that detail that you want 4 and 5 days out, and I'll show you why that's the case in just a moment. Either way, the Gulf of Mexico gets a bunch of rain from two systems combined with several inches along the coast. This takes us through Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening. It's just a rough average, and of course, wind, rain, tornadoes, storm surge, all of those are potential issues, which we don't know the details yet because we don't know what will be exactly happening 4 and 5 days from now. The Gulf of Mexico, it's warm enough to support a tropical storm or hurricane. It's above average. Warm water alone does not make a tropical storm or hurricane, but it's not just the water. You have to look at wind shear and the overall conditions in the water, over the water. So here's this hurricane season so far. These are all the storms that have developed. One that stands out is Isaias, which is the one that moved just offshore of Florida as a hurricane. And part of the reason Isaias stands out is not just because it's the longest track, but go back and look at the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. And it's important to know this cone is just for the center of the storm. Even though it gets bigger, that simply means we're not sure where that center is going to be the farther you go out. But I'm going to play this, and as you watch it move forward and the map jumps around, focus on the fact that the center of that storm basically stays inside all of the previous cones. That's what the cone is for, to tell you where that center is going to go. The cone itself doesn't tell you where the impact will be. The impact is often outside of the cone. So don't just focus on that cone, but take a look again. I'll slow it down a little bit here, moving through the northeastern Caribbean. And if you watch Florida, initially the whole state of Florida was in that forecast cone. But as the cone moves forward, that large area moves forward, and then you get more detail when you're about 3 days away or 2 days away. So that's the big picture of the forecast cone. That's the purpose of it. And keep in mind, until a storm is 2 days away from where you are, there won't be a watch. Watches are issued 48 hours in advance, and warnings are issued about 36 hours in advance. So here's the issue with trying to place the center of a storm. If you're 3 days out, you could be off by 120 miles. These are average data put out by the National Hurricane Center. Each year they reassess their forecast. And 5 days out, the radius could be 225 miles. So that fifth day of the forecast cone, it's 450 miles across. And then talk about wind. Even 2 days in advance, the wind speed could be plus or minus about 15 miles an hour. And these are also averages. Some years, the numbers are much bigger. Some years they're smaller, and for individual storms, 5 days out, you could easily be off by 20 to 25 miles per hour. So when you look at that forecast cone and it says 75-mile-an-hour winds 5 days in advance, you have to adjust and be prepared for a big difference from what it's projecting. All right, here's the answer. A lot of people have asked me this question. When was the last time, or have there ever been, 2 tropical storms in the Gulf at the same time? Dr. Phil Klotzbach at Colorado State University, who does the long-range hurricane season outlooks, he found this 1933, landfall in Florida, landfall on the lower Texas coast, 2 tropical storms at the same time. So yes, it can happen, and it has happened in the past. Something else that has happened in the past, which is another question people have asked, is what happens when 2 tropical storms get close together? Well, here's a new word. You've already heard recently polar vortex, derecho, haboob. You're hearing all these terms that meteorologists have used for over a century. This, when 2 tropical storms or hurricanes get close together, they do not combine. They do not merge. They do not cancel each other. What they do, and both of these could fit in the Gulf of Mexico, even though that wasn't the Pacific. What they do is they slowly can pivot around each other. And the scientist who described that, his last name is Fujiwara. So it's called the Fujiwara effect, when 2 storms get close to each other and then slowly pivot around each other. So another name for you to be a meteorologist with. Another thing that people ask, long-range computer models. Look at this model, and this is how we start making the forecast. It was for last evening. Here's the Gulf of Mexico. There's Hurricane Genevieve. But it was over 2.5 weeks ago, or basically 2.5 weeks ago, somebody sent me on social media this map saying there's a hurricane projected for Louisiana 16 days from now. Should I be worried? Well, that was the morning forecast of that model. This is the evening forecast of that model. And the evening forecast 16 days ago put a hurricane in the Gulf. It still had Genevieve down there. But then 10 days ago, that model didn't put a hurricane or tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico for last evening. And we know there was not one. You could barely see Genevieve out there. 5 days ago, it was pretty consistent with Genevieve and nothing in the Gulf of Mexico. The message is long-range, really long-range computer models don't have as much value as you think. Don't lose sleep over them. They get a lot of shares and likes on social media, but you've got to understand it's hard enough to get a forecast for a tropical storm in 4 or 5 days, let alone 15 or 16. So that's your afternoon update. Things are going to change this evening. All of this data may be totally different for tomorrow. So keep up with a trusted source. I'm NBC 15 Chief Meteorologist Alan Sealls.